So good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Jerusalem Masterclass number 2, Secrets of Death and Burial in Jerusalem. Just by a quick show of hands, and Sarah, if you want to say, how many people here have been to Israel, let's say in the last 10 years? So we'll say between 2013 and now.
Yes.
All right. So for the most part, we've done okay in this group. For those who don't know, we have I think we're calling it intergenerational trip coming up this December. I think it just means anybody who wants to go can go, which is great. And having just returned from Israel at the very beginning of the calendar year on January 4th, with our teens, Fern, Levy, and I went with 25 of our teens. It was amazing, and it was wonderful to be back 4 years after the last time I was there. And I know several of us have not been there in quite some time, and others of us have had family that have been there in the meantime, but not ourselves. And I would love for everybody and anybody who is interested to join Rabbi Briskin this December. And I know information is going to be coming out shortly. So for people like Harriet, it's a piece of cake. It's the same flight. It's just in the opposite direction. 10 hours to get there, 12 hours to get home. It's about the same from where you are at the moment. And we hope that everybody will join us and have a wonderful, wonderful time there. We are going to be talking about kind of some oddities in a little bit about, oddities in certain ways, I should say. About yes. Oh, sorry. About death and burial in Jerusalem. But I just want to take a step back for a moment and ask a very basic question. First of all, let me take even a further step back. The reason the picture's behind me, I told people before we came on and we're recording that I was going to explain this, is we have Tu B'Shvat coming just around the corner a couple of weeks from now. And the first tree that blooms in Israel, so they say, to let you know Tu B'Shvat is on the way, is the almond tree. And that's what's behind me. So these are what we're hoping will bloom soon. I always like to say, in my own way of thinking of things, at the end of January, beginning of February is, of course, the unofficial start of spring in Israel. That's what Tu B'Shvat is all about, New Year of the Trees, as we know. But it also reminds me in a way that's, I don't say equally meaningful, but we'll get close to equally meaningful. It means that baseball's not too far away either. Another month and I'm there, which is really good. So we'll hope the almond trees bloom for many reasons, but that is always the first tree, so they say. And you may remember the song that you sang when we were all children, or even today at Shirmi, Hashikadia Porachat, and the Shikadia is the almond tree. So that's one of the first things we do when it comes to Tu B'Shvat. But now back to Jerusalem. Having just been there, it's still as beautiful as ever, still as wonderful as ever. And we're going to talk a little bit about why perhaps some people, if not millions of people, want to be laid to rest in Jerusalem. But before we get there, if I was to just ask you, what's one thing you know when it comes to Judaism about death and burial? Give me any fact you know. You can just unmute and just unmute and go ahead. It's fine.
The kiddo.
Okay.
In white, and the kiddo.
You're supposed to, traditional, we're just going to go traditional here. You're supposed to be wearing just a white robe called a kiddle. Many people wear that on Shabbat for purity purposes. Many people wear it during the high holidays. And according to Jewish tradition, that is the only thing you're supposed to be wearing. Buried in a pine box, laid to rest so your body decomposes, not to be too, whatever, scientific about it. So your body decomposes as quickly as possible, because your body serves as a guardian, a protector of your soul, which leaves your body when one is no longer physically alive. So what else does somebody know?
So that's why burial is so quick. It's within what, 24 hours? Or
if you, in a traditional world, you want to do it as quickly as possible.
For that obvious reason.
Right. Let's get the body back to where it's supposed to go, meaning returning to the earth, and the soul is on its way already. Anybody else? Something you might know?
In the traditional world, you're not supposed to autopsy.
Okay. These are all fascinating. That is
true.
true. I mean, the idea is that when someone passes away, there is a reason for it that might be considered only something that God should know, and that's kind of where we go with that. Yes. Go ahead, Deb, please.
Traditionally, someone's supposed to be sitting with the person until they're buried.
There's actually a group of people called a Chevra Kadisha, literally meaning a holy group or a holy collection of people that never let the body remain unattended. And also that group is also the group that oftentimes literally cleanses and takes care of the body, preparing it to be laid to rest. So correct. What else do you know? You guys are doing pretty good so far. All right, how many days are we supposed to mourn after someone passes away?
30. 30.
30 is a great number, but we got other numbers too.
7.
7. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you, where does the number 7 come from?
It's a lucky number. Just kidding.
Okay. Pull the slot machine, which they had back there in old, and as we were crossing the desert, and boom, you hit 7, right?
Right.
Right. Does anyone know where it comes from?
7 days to creation.
All right, maybe 7 days of creation. Wonderful, great. So I always like to tell our students, but I'll tell you guys the same thing. If Rabbi Paula or myself or Rabbi Briskin or Cantor Kolbrenner or anybody asks you a question, whether Rabbi Cantor or otherwise, and you're not really sure of the answer, your best guess is to go with it's in the Torah. It's in the Torah. So in this case, that happens to be true. I'm just going to share something with you just to show you a little bit of how far it goes back. Now, hopefully everybody can see what's on my screen here. So just let me know if you can. Thumbs up would be great. Okay. This comes from a part of the Talmud that is the part that deals with the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was the rabbinic court. You can see they had quite a lot to talk about because the Sanhedrin was at least a couple hundred or 100+ pages worth of Talmud. And they look at this verse, which is right here, that says in the story of Noah, and it came to pass that after 7 days, the waters of the flood were upon the earth. That doesn't seem to have anything to do with death or mourning or anything, except if you go to the next section, you may remember our good friend Methuselah, oldest guy in the Torah, 900 and something years old. Well, he came, right around the time of Noah. And we have this idea that Rav, one of the great rabbis, so popular and so famous that his name was just Rav. I mean, that's like being the Cher of rabbis, Madonna of rabbis, whoever you want to be. Meaning these 7 days were the days of mourning for the death of Methuselah. And this is to teach you that eulogies for the righteous prevent calamities from ensuing. So these 7 days were times when people must have been eulogizing Methuselah, of course, not in the Torah, but of course. And you understand now that this is where it comes from. According to the rabbis, the first time in which we see the idea of 7 days for mourning is in the story or connected to the story of Noah. Now, I'm just going to share something with you that you may say, but wait, that doesn't quite make sense. So I'm going to skip ahead. This is now a little bit later in the book of Genesis, chapter 50, which you can see here. The story of Noah, we know, comes far before that. And we have this story of Joseph's family. Okay? And they come to this place called Goren Ha'atad. It's just beyond the Jordan River. And there they had a very great and solemn lamentation. And he, meaning Joseph and his family, observed a mourning period of 7 days for his father. Okay. We see that there's this idea of a 7-day mourning period. Great. So clearly it's in the Torah. That's our answer to why 7 days. Okay, not a trick question. Why 30 days for Shloshim? Would anyone like to garner a guess?
In the Torah.
Thank you, Rabbi. It is in the Torah. And in fact, most famously, it is in the Torah with a guy we know very well. This is the very end of the book of Deuteronomy, or towards the very end, literally the last couple verses. Verse 8 in chapter 34. And the Israelites mourned or bewailed Moses in the steppes of Moab for 30 days. The period of wailing and mourning for Moses came to an end. So here we learn 30 days. That was it. And you're done, according to the Torah. And all the more so, if we're going to mourn Moses for 30 days, he was pretty great. So everybody else should be 30 days too. Okay. However, I will just say one thing. Moses is not the first guy, literally not the first guy in the Torah, to be mourned for 30 days. In fact, I'm just going to click some things over here. If we go to his brother Aaron, way back in the book of Numbers, a whole book before, it says the whole community knew that Aaron had breathed his last breath. All the house of Israel bewailed or mourned Aaron 30 days. So the idea of 7 or 30 both come, I should say it that way, from the Torah. Okay. Yes, Bob.
In the Jewish calendar, how long is a typical month?
So it depends on the month, right? But
Yeah,
it's
that's a good
kind of like our months, somewhere in the, higher 20s to 30-ish range.
30-ish?
30-ish. I mean, you sometimes have 30. So the other thing that I will say is that there are days, we can talk more about this if we want, but there are days during that month that one is not, quote unquote, supposed to mourn, right? Or actively mourn, right? And we can talk about that in just a little bit. So even though it is 30 days, there are times when there are, even in that 30 days, periods of stopping, if that's the right way to put it. One just last important note. What you didn't see anywhere in the Torah is the idea of the mourner's Kaddish, right? Which is a prayer we all know very well. And that is because that prayer came along way later in history. And you know that for many reasons, not the least of which is the mourner's Kaddish is not written in Hebrew, right? The mourner's Kaddish is written in Aramaic. Right? So after the destruction of the first temple, for sure, when our ancestors were banished to Babylonia, which is what they spoke, where they spoke Aramaic, many stuck around and enjoyed their time there, even though the Israelites were allowed to return to Jerusalem and the rest of Israel, and Aramaic became a language that was used quite a bit. I will just say one thing that's incredibly powerful about Mourner's Kaddish. If it's something you want to learn more about, just let me know and I'm happy to direct you. The idea is that someone who is a mourner, which we'll talk about in just a second, is supposed to say Mourner's Kaddish every day for a year, which we know. The idea behind that is something very powerful. According to Jewish tradition, according to the rabbis, the gates of heaven open every time someone says Mourner's Kaddish for somebody. And somewhere in that first year, in that first 365 days, a person's soul goes to heaven, gets to heaven. Only God knows exactly what day. And according to Jewish tradition, only God knows the most righteous of every generation, and their souls immediately upon their passing go to heaven. But somewhere during that year, could be the first day, 20th day, 300th day, whatever it is, a person's soul makes it to heaven. The idea is that when we say Mourner's Kaddish, the gates of heaven open up and the souls that we're praying for start to move towards heaven, to use a kind of an image. But when we finish saying Mourner's Kaddish, the gates close, gates open, gates close. And somewhere during that first year, the soul enters. So just in case you were wondering, am I really doing anything when I say Mourner's Kaddish for someone? According to Jewish tradition, incredibly powerful. One last thing, and this is something that you may see more in a traditional synagogue, but I will say growing up, this was something that for me, my mom also, who grew up in a more traditional household, made sure that I, in this case, didn't do. There are really only certain people who should say Mourner's Kaddish, traditional, okay? So just to kind of go through the list, a brother or a sister, a mother or a father, a son or a daughter, a husband or a wife. Okay, those are like your list of mourners. So for someone like myself who is lucky enough to still have all of those people with me, right? I technically didn't need to say mourner's Kaddish any time in my life. There has become a tradition that we say it as a way to say it for those who don't have anybody to say Kaddish for them. Okay, so that's kind of where that's come from. But traditionally, you will only see mourners do the mourners or pray the mourners Kaddish. So that's a little background. Now, here's my question for you. Why do so many people want to be buried in Jerusalem, even if they never lived there, set foot, or spent any time in Jerusalem in their life? Does anybody know? Jewish and non-Jewish, by the way, just in case you're wondering.
Really?
Would anyone like to take a guess or a more than educated guess? Rabbi, please.
Well, I assume.
I think that the Messiah is supposed to show up in Jerusalem first.
That is correct. And who doesn't want to be there with a front row seat for when the Messiah comes? Then everybody. I will say one other thing, and now I'm going to give you a little bit of a fun, not everybody believes this, but if you believe it, it's kind of a fun one. How about that? Which is, there are some people who believe that when the world is made perfect, when the Messiah comes or the Messianic age is ushered in, everyone who is righteous in their life will be brought back to life. Will they be brought back at whatever age, and how will everybody fit into the world? That is for others to discuss. But the idea is, if you're going to come back, you really want to be right there in Jerusalem. The second thing, and then Harriet, I promise I'll get to your question. An even smaller number of people believe that Israel is so holy that Israel itself, when this time comes, will rip out of the ground and hover above all other countries. So you got to be there to, you're not getting there without being there. So you got to be there. Harriet, go ahead.
Do we have any connection like the Buddhists do, that you come back as different things?
There is, and Rabbi, if there's something you know about this, great. I think that is a very, very small group of people. I would say it is
Like
not
my
in
husband
any
won't
way
kill-
really. Go on, I'm sorry.
My husband won't kill an insect. He
Okay.
gathers it up and he puts it outside.
Okay.
That's me.
Oh, say that again, Sarah.
I'm the same way. It drives my husband crazy.
Well, if people or whoever are reincarnated, a way to hedge your bets. Way to hedge your bets. So, Mindy, you had a question? You just
I do. It's about the mourner's Kaddish, and I've
Yeah.
always wondered about this.
Sure.
What does it have to do with, other than praising God and thanking him for being, God?
amazing, right?
What has it got to do with mourning someone who has passed?
It has nothing to do with mourning. And by the way, the entire prayer, when you know how you even read it in Aramaic and you say to yourself, all those words sound the same right after a while. And that is because you're saying things like, God, you're amazing, wonderful, great, powerful, strong, right? It's just this list of kind of adjectives about God. And the idea is that at a time in one's life, when you're trying to get a soul to ascend to heaven, and in a time in one's life when you are mourning, the idea of having a connection, this is my understanding, having a connection or a relationship, if you want to use that term, belief in God is something that's very important at that moment, for that year, whatever you want to say, if you're doing it every day.
Okay.
But yeah, there is nothing about death
There's
or
nothing.
someone who has passed away or a person or anything in Kaddish Yato, in Moorish Kaddish.
Thanks.
Excellent. So I just want to share a couple of quick pictures with you guys before we get to some of the other folks we're going to talk about today. So this was from our recent time in Jerusalem. Can anybody or would anybody like to read whose burial site we're at here?
Herzl.
Excellent.
Theodore Herzl.
So this is Theodore Herzl at Har Herzl, the main military cemetery in Israel. It's in Jerusalem. Side note, Herzl never lived long enough to see Israel itself be created, but he wanted to make sure that his body was laid to rest there. Okay. Sorry, there's going to be a couple going the wrong way. Hold on my pictures. That, by the way, is the Children's Memorial at Yad Vashem. All right. Who is this?
Shimon Peres.
Good. So Shimon Peres also laid to rest at Har Herzl Cemetery. And you can see very plain, straightforward name, years of his life. This one is one of the very few that's different. I mean, if you've been to Har Herzl, you'll know who this is, but you don't have to know that this is Zach Luber, one of our 8th graders, but does anybody know who these two people are? One is with the black stone and one is with the white stone.
One is Yitzhak Rabin.
Right, and the white
black
stone
stone?
is Leah Rabin, his wife. Okay.
Ah, yeah.
So theirs is one of the very few graves at Har Herzl at the military cemetery that's different than the others. Okay, for obvious reasons. And here, I don't know if you can see it behind these two young ladies. This is Brandy Chesner and this is Nora Eder. This is at the grave of Hannah Senesh.
Mhm.
But one of the things that I will share with you is you can see behind them. Let me see if this will work on my computer. I'm gonna try to make it bigger. So much for that theory. You can see behind them that there's a gravestone here. It's actually not Hannah Senesh's. Hers is right behind them. You can't see it. But on every grave at Har Herzl, it's very similar. And what you can see here is the person who died. This is a very beautiful kind of series of graves shaped like like when a parachute comes down, because these were all women who were parachutists in the military. And you can see, if I can see at least from here, that the woman who is mentioned here is 22 years old, right? And when you go to Har Herzl, when you go to the military cemeteries in Israel, most of the people are very young. In fact, the youngest person, from what we understand, buried at Har Herzl is 12 years old, right? And that was at Israel's War of Independence. Everybody fought. Didn't matter. Everybody fought. So there are people who want to be buried in Jerusalem for military reasons. There's people who want to be buried in Jerusalem because or people want them to be buried in Jerusalem because they are great political leaders. There's people who want to be buried in Jerusalem for religious reasons. Okay, in fact, there may be people in our own congregation who want to do that. I do just want to share that there are some famous and not so famous people that are also buried in Jerusalem. Let's start. I'm going to start with a short video. The video I'm going to show you is actually not Jerusalem, but I'm going to get to why it has to deal with Jerusalem in just a minute. So let me share this video. This is, for anybody who's been to Israel, this is in the Judean Valley. And there is this very odd, what appears to be mountain that is built here. So let's take a listen. Hopefully you'll be able to hear what this tour guide has to talk.
Desert. It's a strenuous hike to reach its top. And 2,000 years ago, Herod created a lavish palace complex on its summit. Later, Romans defeated here Jewish rebels. And no, I'm not in Masada, nor in Machaerus. Welcome to Herodium.
So this place is called Herodium. It is where King Herod is buried. We'll talk about him and his importance in just a minute. But a lot of people know King Herod because of Masada, one of his other palaces. King Herod is actually buried here. Okay. He is not buried at Masada. He is also not buried with his family. His family is buried in Jerusalem. So, question 1, why is King Herod not buried with his family? What king wouldn't want to be buried with their family to show just how amazing their kingdom has been? Does anybody want to take a guess, or does anybody know? They're not buried at Masada. They didn't die at Masada, or they weren't in any kind of military battle. Does anyone want to take a guess? Why is King Herod's family not buried with him? Anybody here, I hope the answer to this question is no. Anybody here paranoid about any of your family members? Like, who knows what they might do to me? Please answer no. Please answer no. You're being recorded. So, King Herod believed every one of his family members was coming after him. So King Herod had a rather interesting relationship with many people in his family, including, and I'm not exaggerating here, King Herod believed one of his wives was going to kill him. So he did the only thing that anybody would do. He killed her first, which is, of course, what you have to do in such a situation. But he did love her. He did love her very much. So he decided to keep her around after he killed her and covered her in honey and just let her stay there for a while. I mean, King Herod had his moments. He also built, of course, Masada, which many of us know, and he built that. If you've been to Masada, you know it is literally in the middle of nowhere. And what you may or may not know, even if you've been up the tram or walked up the snake path or the Roman path, of all the what we might call mountains in the desert, Masada is not connected to any other mountain. So you can't access it by walking over or from one mountain to the next. So Herod built, or the slaves of Herod built this palace in the middle of nowhere on top of a giant mountain in the desert because this guy was crazy. And he figured he could get away from everybody by just going there, which he did. Good for him. But his family is actually buried in Jerusalem, not very far away from the King David Hotel. So if you've ever been there, if you had an overlook behind the King David Hotel, now I'm going to show you another video, or a part of a video, where you're going to see King Herod's family too.
We are here at Herod's family tomb.
Hold on, there we go. Let's do it again. We're coming back.
We are here at Herod's family tomb. Just east of us is the Hinnom Valley and the old city of Jerusalem.
Quick note about the Hinnom Valley, or the Gehinnom Valley. Jewish people do not believe in hell, right? We've in other instances talked about that. But the Gehinnom Valley is considered the place where all the people who weren't Israelite or weren't Jewish, you pick the people who worshipped Molech or other gods, did sacrifice their children. So it's considered like the Valley of Death, or the Valley. By the way, when you're staying at the King David Hotel or right next to the old city, you're going to walk through it and people are now having barbecues and playing soccer there. But it's considered to be the place where, all the bad stuff happened.
You can see the walls on the other side of the trees. Every website we looked at to research this site tells us that the grave is behind the King David Hotel.
You can kind of see the King David Hotel in the center here, up a little bit there. So if you've ever been to the King David Hotel, you know where we are.
The King David Hotel is over there beyond those trees. And yet there's a building here that is not the King David Hotel. So Herod's family.
So one of the things this points out, by the way, is that everywhere you go in Israel, there is some type of archaeological something or other going on. So even behind the King David Hotel, it's also why it's incredibly hard to build in Jerusalem, right? Or anywhere for that matter in Israel.
Tomb is not located behind the King David Hotel. It's located behind this building. Herod the Great was buried at the Herodium.
Now I'm just going to pause this. We saw Herodium. It's a little hard to see from this picture, but this pathway here, which you can't get into, it's locked and all that, is where the family is buried. Just to the left of it is the distinguishing factor, or it's how people know it's his family's tomb. There is, you can see here where I'm pointing, hopefully you can see it, there's a part of a stone that is circular. That was used to cover over the door. It's literally a rolling stone. So Herod's entire family buried in Jerusalem. Herod himself not, because even though he wanted to give them a proper burial, he was totally paranoid about them. And so he is buried in Herodium, which is a distinctly not Jewish or Hebrew, whatever you say, sounding place in Israel. But there's a lot of that because as we know, Israel was conquered and reconquered and reconquered and reconquered by almost everybody. So you find towns with all different kinds of names that are there. So Herod's a great example of one of the people who are buried in Jerusalem. That is kind of one of the stranger stories, right? Because he is not buried there, but his family is. But it tells an interesting story. Now the story of Harry Potter. You may say to yourself, it is impossible. Harry Potter can't be buried in Israel because Harry Potter is a fake person. And that is true. But it should be noted that Harry Potter is played by the wonderful Daniel Radcliffe, a member of the Jewish people, who is alive and well. So in some way, there is a Jewish connection between Harry Potter and Israel. But I am now going to show you another picture that proves that Harry Potter is in fact buried in Israel. Look right here. Good old private number 52531. I'm going to make it bigger. 1351. Harry Potter. There he is. He was killed in action at Hebron. I mean, he was there. He was in Israel in 1939, clearly before the state of Israel was created. And as you can see in the European fashion, the date comes before the month. So July 22nd, 1939, he was killed. 19 years old, almost 20 years old. Harry Potter himself, soldier in the British Army, killed and laid to rest in Ramlah in Israel. So if anyone ever asks you, is it true that Harry Potter is buried in Israel? The answer to that question is a definite yes. Definitely true, 100%. Now, one other person that we know, this is a real person now, is, and I'm sure many of us, if not all of us, have seen the movie Schindler's List. Oskar Schindler also laid to rest in Jerusalem. For those who, to get back to one thing that Rabbi said earlier, if you are envisioning, if you've been to Jerusalem, you know that if you're at the old city, depending on which way you're looking, there is a giant cemetery across a little bit of a valley called the Mount of Olives Cemetery. That cemetery is not there by accident. It's there for a number of reasons, not the least of which is if you look towards from the Mount of Olives Cemetery to the old city, you will see that one of the gates of the old city is kind of been stoned over, like it's closed up. And according to tradition, when the Messiah comes, which is what Rabbi mentioned earlier, not only will the Messiah be coming through a gate of Jerusalem, but much like the only example I can give you, remember those old Kool-Aid commercials where the Kool-Aid guy came right through the side of the wall and kicked over the stones? That's kind of what I envision happening. The Messiah is going to come through those walls, those stone walls, and the people who are on the Mount of Olives, theoretically, will see it first. And so Oskar Schindler, not Jewish, but Oskar Schindler, amongst many other people who are not Jewish, buried at the Mount of Olives. And again, in honor and in respect and in memory of all that he did for the Jewish people. There are actually many, many cemeteries, just to kind of go down a different road for a minute. There are many, many cemeteries in Jerusalem, which is not hard to imagine. But one of them, which I'm going to share with you here in just a moment, houses a particularly interesting person. Okay. You can see here, this is in Jerusalem. It's called the Jerusalem War Cemetery. I don't know if anybody's ever been there. I've never been there. But you can see is the free gift of the people of Palestine, because this was before Israel was created as a country. The perpetual resting place of those of the Allied armies who fell in the war of 1914 to 1918. Those people are honored here. There happens to be another incredibly famous person who is laid to rest here, which I will be happy to share with you in just a moment. I mentioned to you before that Harry Potter is laid to rest in Israel, and he was a soldier in the British Army. There was another guy who around that same time period served as a driver for the British Army and who was very, very nondescript, except he happens to have an incredibly famous name. And so I show you that also William Shakespeare himself is buried in Jerusalem. Oh, sorry, I made that too big. He was driver T4/213-706. He was in the Royal Army Service Corps, May 23rd, 1918, passing away at the age of 41. Who knew William Shakespeare lived so long? Look at this guy. He was great. And he was amazing. But William Shakespeare was totally nondescript and was just a driver in the British military. Unfortunately, passed away in a, he was driving when his vehicle was attacked, I guess is the best way to put it, and he perished. Okay. So we have all of these amazingly famous, quote unquote, people who are buried in Jerusalem. Okay. And I will just share one other, for the moment, particular story that I want to just share with you. That is perhaps meaningful to us, given where we are and where we come from. So I'm going to do this. Hold on one second. My computer is giving me a little bit of a challenge. Let's do this. Okay. I'm going to just show you a picture. This, by the way, is a grave that many of us have been to in Jerusalem. It is like all the others, except it revolutionized also the way in which graves are now, to use a term, adorned, decorated, whatever it may be. You can see the picture of the person right here, okay? And you can see that it says at the bottom here at the foot of this person's grave, an American Oles, someone who made Aliyah, whose love of God and Israel is eternal. The name's written in Hebrew. This person also 22 years old. But you can see there's all these decorations, and usually there's something, a Phillies hat, Council Rock something. This one happens to have a Ramah hat over here for those who know Camp Ramah in the Poconos. And this is the burial site of Michael Levin. For anybody who knows Michael or knows his story, Michael grew up in our neighborhood, literally, went to preschool at Shirami. His family ended up being at OHEV for most of their life. And certainly I think still belong there if I'm not mistaken. His niece was once a member of our preschool, and now they are elsewhere also. But when Michael died in Lebanon, there was a feeling of, we have to do something a little bit different for him. Okay. And so the Israeli government / military started to now allow people to do a little more, let's call it adorning, if that's the right word, or remembering of people in a more personal way than just the other graves previous. You can kind of see behind him the way in which graves were, right? Just the stone, that kind of thing, etc. And you can see next to him, there is another person, Asher, who is standing here with his picture on his grave. But that's very rare to see, unless you get more and more recent. But obviously, Michael's death is something that impacted many people in our community. For those who don't know, obviously there was a funeral service at Har Herzl, but there was also a funeral service at Shirami for those, because so many people wanted to come and to attend. So again, people who are laid to rest in Jerusalem, one of the things that is particularly notable about his situation is that, unlike other times during the year, he was laid to rest on Tisha B'Av, which is a fast day, which many people know is a day of mourning in general, etc. And there was a real question. There's a beautiful video, if you ever get the chance to see it, it's called A Hero in Heaven. And his parents are interviewed in that video. And they kind of had this nervous moment of, is anyone going to show up? for our kid's funeral, right? Who knows him? He's a lone soldier. It's Tisha B'Av, a fast day, a holy day. And when they get to Har Herzl, they tell the story. It's actually very powerful. So I'm not doing it justice, but there's all these people there. And they say to themselves, oh, I can't believe it. Like someone else's child has died and everyone else is here for that funeral. And we're going to be standing like, we don't want to do anything that's going to bother them. Like we just want to honor our son. And little did they know that literally like tens of thousands of people came to Michael's funeral. It was amazing by all accounts, the outpouring of support for a person who many people didn't know, right? But that is something also that you find when you go to Israel or Jerusalem in particular. There is a feeling of many that there are very important people here for us to honor and to make sure that we, whether we knew them or not, it's important for us. So one of the other customs that we know is that if you are in an area and you have the opportunity to go to someone's funeral, you're supposed to go to be there to help those who are mourning.
So strange.
I'm going to say one other thing. This is also a grave from Har Herzl. Okay. This you can see sometimes they place the particular unit the person was in. And you can see here that sometimes they will put their, kind of army number. Okay. This is totally in Hebrew. You don't even have the age of the person here. This is Yoni Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu's brother, who many people know came to America when his brother came to America, but is also most well known for his involvement in what happened in Entebbe. And he was one of the literal people who went onto the plane. So again, in Jerusalem, we have military heroes, we have religious heroes, we have totally nondescript people from armies that are not Jewish. We have heroes that were not Jewish that saved the Jewish people like Oskar Schindler. We have all types of people who want to be buried or choose to be buried in Jerusalem, Herod's family, you name it. So I know I've talked a lot for now. I have a couple more things that I would love to share, but does anybody have any questions or any thoughts at the moment? You're more than welcome.
Have you actually visited many of these cemeteries personally?
So Har Herzl we go to all the time with the kids and with anybody. I think it's worth going to any for those who have been to where I'm going to say, depending on how many steps you want to walk up, the military cemetery, Har Herzl and Yad Vashem are literally next door to each other. So you can walk from Yad Vashem up some steps to Har Herzl. So there are many times when we've done that with kids, with other people. There's also an incredibly meaningful spot at Har Herzl. I will just say that oftentimes is where people know somebody, which is it's kind of like, almost think of it like the Vietnam or other memorial, kind of like a wall of names where people who have perished because of terror attacks. So a lot of times there you will see people who are coming to visit whoever they're coming to visit. And when we were just there a couple of weeks ago, right next to, there's a famous military leader, Roy Klein, who is buried at Har Herzl. Right next to him, there was someone who was observing a yurt site. There must have been 40 people there, who were speaking about whoever was a couple people down. Another place that I've been, I will just share, that is you saw Yitzhak Rabin, you saw Shimon Peres, Golda Meir is also in that same spot. There are several, very few, but there is one particular prime minister of Israel who is not buried there, and that is David Ben-Gurion. For anybody who has been to the Negev and to a place called Sde Boker, that is where David Ben-Gurion is buried. And he chose, as a political leader, you can choose where you want to be buried in Israel. In fact, in the military, your family can also choose. So sometimes people choose to be buried in the local cemetery wherever they happen to be. Their family happens to be. But David Ben Gurion is buried at Sde Boker because he wanted to encourage people to come live in the Negev. He had his home in Tel Aviv for anybody who's ever been there. If you have not been to his home in the Negev, it's really fascinating to go there. He was trying to encourage especially young people. At one time, I don't think this number is quite the same, but it's not drastically different. At one time, 92% of people that lived in Israel lived north of the Negev, right? So what I would say it the other way, 8% of people lived in the Negev. And he really wanted to encourage especially young people to come there. So he's buried there. We've been to that cemetery. For reasons you might imagine, especially with kids, we do not go to like any of the war cemeteries or any, meaning the, like where you saw William Shakespeare or Harry Potter. I've personally been to the Mount of Olives cemetery, but not with the kids. So, yep. Anybody can go to any of them. There's no, like, they're not keeping you out from doing it. Okay. Anybody else have any questions before we go? Yeah, Harriet. You're muted at the moment, Harriet. Sorry.
I went to visit my niece in Modin,
Yeah, Modine, yeah.
and I don't know why, but I looked to the left instead of where I had to turn right. And I saw the Maccabees were buried on the main road. And my niece says, "Oh yeah, I go over there and sometimes I collect herbs."
So I will just say, I will say, I'm glad that she went there. And there's a real question of like, is it the real Maccabees? But let it be the real Maccabees. Why not? I will share one, just reminded me when you said something here. I just want to show you something that is kind of an interesting particular cemetery in Israel. This is not Jerusalem. For those who know Sfat is one of the 4 holy cities in Israel. And this is part of the Sfat cemetery. And it is a little hard to see, but over to the left is something that's of particular note. And that is, I'm just going to go back for a minute. The Sfat cemetery, sorry, let me do it this way.
No, buried above.
Yeah, but the Sfat cemetery, it's a little hard. This is not the clearest picture. Almost everything is painted in this light blue. And if you go to Sfat, everywhere, it's light blue. So for example, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and then I want to pull something up, okay, that I can just pull from when we were just there. So what I'm going to show you is not the cemetery in Sfat, but I will just show you something that is, let's see if I have it on here. Okay. So this is a picture of one of the most famous synagogues in Sfat. You can see that all the windows and all the gates and all the railings are painted blue, especially the light blue. And that is because Sfat is connected to the idea or to the element of air. Sfat's way up there as far as Israel goes. And so the idea is that light blue, that pale blue is everywhere as part of what Sfat is all about. So it's just another example of how a cemetery or place where people are laid to rest can also reflect the community in which one lives. Okay, so any other questions before we move a little bit forward? You're more than welcome to ask anything you want. Okay, so the last kind of thing that I wanted to share with you guys today, oh, let me say one thing before the last thing, which is the videos that Kobe has. He talked to me earlier today and I tried to figure this out, but his website is not working great. So I will send them to you and you can watch all of the information that's there. There's actually 4 videos connected to death and burial in Israel. But one of the things that is part of what he talks about that I think is very important is that, yes, there is a honoring of those who have passed away. Yes, there is a reverence given to the places and people keep them up and keep them clean and all that other kind of stuff. But apropos of what we saw with Herod's family tomb, because of Israel's history, You literally find these things everywhere. You find people buried everywhere. So it could be next to the King David Hotel. It could be down the street from the sports, the basketball stadium, wherever it is, because historically people have just lived there and, treated it the way that they've treated it. And one of the things that is most challenging is something that Harriet, you brought up in your own way, is the idea of, are the people who are there or proclaimed to be wherever there is, buried wherever, really there? So you will see there's places like tombs of the prophets and tombs of this king and tombs. Who knows if they're really there? We don't know. Not the least of which is because prior to pick a year, people love to go into tombs and take everything out of them. So are the people really there? Maybe. Is there, anything that might identify them or be a family heirloom or something? Someone already stole that, right? Hundreds of years ago. So there's also a mystery really that surrounds burial in a place like Israel, a place like Jerusalem. And in particular, there are some of these, like, you're never supposed to make a burial place like a shrine, okay? But I'll just share one story. There is, as you know, various divisions in the Orthodox world, much like there's different Reform congregations or conservative congregations. There's an incredibly famous rabbi known as the Sfat Emet, okay? Like the, Ashkenazic guy of greatness, whatever you want to call him, for one particular community. So he is buried in Jerusalem. Okay, in it's a grave that doesn't look like most others. It's red brick. I guess that's what he wanted. But for example, that has now become like a shrine-like for people who follow the Sfat Emet. And although that may have been many years ago, you should also know that in a similar way here in America, for those members of Chabad Lubavitch communities, Schneerson's grave is also like that. So there are people who also come to visit graves of famous people, famous rabbis or great teachers that go there still for guidance, today. And then there are the more very touching, very sentimental ones. I'll share one last story about what can happen at Har Herzl. So there is a story of a guy who is getting ready. Well, the daughter is getting ready to get married, right? And so there's a tour that's going through Har Herzl, and there's a young man in his 20s who's sitting there having a cup of tea next to one of the graves. And for whatever reason, the people who are walking through, say, excuse me, like, I know you're having a cup of tea. Like, can you just it's kind of different than what we're used to. Are you willing to share why you're having a cup of tea? And the person who is there says, look, tomorrow I am going to get married. And my brother is here. And I just want to sit and talk with my brother for a little bit before I get married. I want to have a cup of tea with him because I really wish he could be there tomorrow. Right. And so there are these very sentimental, wonderful, heart-touching stories, right, that I think really talk to us about the idea that even though, and this can be universal, but certainly for many who are in Israel or who are laid to rest in Israel, that even though someone is no longer physically on earth, and even though we can, logically say, I'm not literally talking to the person, I'm not literally sitting with the person there is this real feeling. Perhaps we've even had this with people in our own families. Perhaps we even go visit people, whether it's here or elsewhere in this country or around the world. And we say to ourselves, I'm just going to talk to my dad, or I'm just going to talk to my mom, or I'm going to talk to my brother or sister, whoever it happens to be. And there is something very powerful in Judaism and something very powerful when it comes to, I think, Israel in particular, when we have those moments, that are very personal. And so maybe one of the things that really for me came out of learning more about all of the people that I mentioned and the many that are going to be in the videos is that there really is something important, meaningful, not just a mitzvah, but emotionally and otherwise meaningful about fulfilling that mitzvah of honoring someone who has passed away and taking care of the body, as we mentioned at the beginning, and remembering these people every year at their yort site, or doing the 7, Shiva, and doing Shloshim, and, just kind of keeping them in our own way or ways alive with, perhaps the way in which we carry ourselves. I've told many people, and this is the last thing I'll say about this, is that I didn't know many of my grandparents, but couple of my grandfathers passed away. I had many grandfathers, which is a funny story in and of itself. But my one grandfather, who lived until I was 11, was, like, to me, the greatest. And I've often told people that, like, the thing that is always been like this moment in my life, or this thought in my life, is, on the one hand, like, I could not have given a bigger honor, I believe, than my son has his name as, and Jay's middle name is my grandfather's name. And yet, my grandfather died when I was 11 and Jay was born when I was 29. So clearly this is not going to happen. But I would have given anything for them to have met each other. It would have been amazing. And so even though they haven't, like, met each other, I talk a lot about my grandfather to Jay, right? So then maybe in some way they have kind of met. And so I hope that for each of us, as we think of those who are no longer physically here, or maybe the next time we're in Jerusalem, we may be thinking about them based on a story we hear, that we remember that, we have a responsibility to carry their names, to carry their teachings, to carry their importance into the future. So I think that's a good spot for us to leave it for today. If there's anything anyone wants to add, that would be great. You can unmute. And then I will stop recording, hopefully, in just a little bit. Well, I wish everyone a wonderful evening. All the best. Go ahead, Essie. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just, am I muted?
Yep, you're unmuted. You're good.
I was just going to thank you that this was so interesting.
Thank you very much. And I will definitely send you guys all the videos. And then I believe it's the 26th. No, it's a Sunday. So it's not the, maybe it's February 26th. I'll look it up. Kobe is going to be with us live on a Sunday morning.
Right, good.
And so, or it'll be maybe a Sunday, 12 o'clock, something like that. And then, so he will join us there. Sarah asked a quick question: do non-Ashkenazi Israelis name after the dead? So let's just talk briefly about Ashkenazi, Sephardim, etc. Ashkenazim generally only name after those who have passed away. Sephardim can go either way. So sometimes you will meet, like, great grandpa Bob and great grandchild Bob, or Sarah, or whoever it happens to be. They usually go with the oldest guy.
Rabbi,
Yeah, Mindy, please.